indeed a threat, and that there were a number of places around the world where we were receiving people who could have the contagion of the coronavirus. That is why at the border we were very clear about giving clear instructions about the need for self-isolation.
The honourable member for Carleton.
After the government received intelligence from our military about the dangers of the coronavirus in China, it allowed 2,000 people from the Hubei province, the most affected province, to come into Canada. Were these 2,000 people quarantined? Yes or no?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as I hope the member opposite knows, quarantine is a very specific legal term, and the measures of quarantine are currently in place. Prior to that obligatory quarantine being in place, incoming travelers, whether they were Canadian or not, were very clearly told to self-isolate.
The honourable member for Carleton.
Told to self-isolate but not required to self-isolate, and therefore this government allowed thousands of people into this country who came from the affected regions, even though there were briefings the government had explaining the danger of doing just that. On which date will the first wage subsidy be in the hands of a small business employer?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, we are obviously working as hard as we can to make sure that the wage subsidy gets into people's hands as rapidly as possible. With the passing of this legislation, organizations will be able to go to their banks to make it even faster. My expectation is it'll be within 2 to 4 weeks or so when we'll see that get into companies' hands.
Question, the honourable member for Carleton.
Number one goal of getting out the CERB was to get it in the hands of as many Canadians as possible. We're working now to make sure that in the long run there isn't consequences in terms of EI eligibility, whether that be hours worked or number of weeks accumulated, doesn't negatively impact certain already vulnerable populations.
Of Central Okanagan, Smilkameen, Nicola.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister announced earlier that the CRB would be changed to allow people to work and be eligible. This motion today calls on the government to make those changes.
For the CERB are in fact legislated. You have to have earned more than $5,000 in income, you have to be resident in Canada, and you have to have stopped working for COVID reasons. We know that there are people earning very, very low amounts of money, and we have committed to creating a threshold under which Canadians can continue to earn income and access the CERB. We're working on that, and it will be decisions will be made on that shortly. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, can the minister explain whether or not legislative changes would be required to the CRB for this to come into effect?
Thank you for the question. In order to change the criteria to include groups of individuals who are not working but who have not stopped working for CERB, legislative changes would be required. In order to create a threshold of income under which individuals would remain eligible for the CERB, regulatory changes would be required. Measures built into the front, namely the requirement for a social insurance number, and there are integrity measures built into the back. We are asking Canadians to honestly attest that they meet the eligibility criteria as I laid them out, and I would hope that no one is suggesting that Canadians do not honestly reply to these questions.
The honourable member.
Well, I do also.
Mr. Speaker, we do not know at this point if legislative amendments will be required, so I think it would be premature to even speculate when the House would have to resume, if at all.
Member.
Mr. Speaker, speculation.
Last answer, Mr. Speaker. If you want to change the law so that somebody who is not working because of CERB, then you need a legislative change. If you want to create a threshold of income under which somebody can still qualify for CERB, you need a regulatory change. So it's not apparent, given the unanimous consent motion today, that we will have to make legislative changes. With respect to seasonal workers, I apologize for any confusion I may have created in the past, but we are looking at and we have committed in this House today to ensure that seasonal workers will indeed be covered. Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I am very hopeful and confident in the integrity and truthfulness of Canadians in this time of crisis. We have, as I mentioned, built-in integrity measures at the front At the back end, based on social insurance numbers, we can track if someone receives the benefit and also receives a T4. We can track if someone receives the benefit and gets a second payment accidentally. There will be a certain amount of integrity measures absolutely in the weeks, months, and year to come. But quite frankly, Mr. Speaker, I don't think that there are Canadians out there in this time of need spending a lot of time trying to defraud the government.
L'honorable député de Montmagny,